He was the cowboy every American loved, but no one really knew. On screen, Guy Madison was a hero, rugged, righteous, unforgettable. Off screen, a man with a secret so dangerous it could have ended everything. For decades, it stayed buried, in letters and shadows, in silence. But now the truth is finally coming to light. Not gossip, a hidden love story Hollywood never wanted you to hear. He dated Hollywood's biggest stars, and no one knew. He was Wild Bill Hickok on screen, tall, fearless, the cowboy every boy wanted to be. But off camera, Guy Madison lived a different life. One he couldn't talk about. One the studio never scripted. Behind the glossy movie posters and carefully crafted romances, he loved quietly, and he loved men. For decades, his truth was buried, hidden behind studio contracts, magazine smiles, and fake relationships arranged to keep the cameras rolling. But now, for the first time, his private letters reveal names, real names, of actors he loved in secret. This isn't gossip, it's history, and it's a love story Hollywood never wanted you to hear. He was tall, striking, with a face that looked like it belonged on a monument. That square jaw, that steady gaze. He was everything America wanted in a leading man. But behind that perfectly carved image was someone carrying a truth too dangerous to say out loud. Guy Madison wasn't just living two lives. He was surviving two worlds, one for the cameras, one behind drawn curtains. And in both, he had to play a role. Before the bright lights, the fan letters, and the magazine covers, he was just Robert Ozell Mosley. Born on January 19, 1922, in Kern County, California, Guy Madison entered the world not as a star, but as the son of the soil. Raised during the crushing years of the Great Depression, his childhood echoed with the quiet rhythms of survival, hard work, family dinners, and the kind of dreams that didn't dare speak too loud. There were no agents, no cameras, no Hollywood fantasies, just dust, duty, and decency. He never imagined becoming an actor. It wasn't even in the picture. After graduating from Bakersfield College, he studied animal husbandry, not to chase stardom, but to build a simple life. A life with his hands in the earth, raising animals, living close to nature. That was his plan. Steady, grounded, unremarkable, and safe. But life has a strange way of rewriting its own script. When World War II broke out, Madison didn't hesitate. He enlisted in the United States Navy and served as a radio operator in the Pacific Theater. The war didn't make him famous, but it shaped him. Those years at sea instilled discipline, honor, silence, and a kind of inward strength, the quiet resolve of a man who doesn't need to prove himself to anyone. More than anything, the Navy gave him something Hollywood would later crave: a stillness, a masculine calm that couldn't be taught in acting school. When you looked at Guy Madison, you saw a man who'd been through something and survived it. Then, in 1944, while on a short leave in Los Angeles, fate stepped in wearing polished shoes and a Hollywood grin. Henry Wilson, the infamous talent agent who had a sixth sense for beauty and marketability, spotted Madison by pure chance. Wilson wasn't just a star maker, he was a sculptor of myths. And in Madison, he didn't just see a handsome face, he saw potential, profit, power. Within weeks, Madison, this quiet, war-tested farm boy, was cast in his first film role. It was small, uncredited, a background sailor in the wartime drama Since You Went Away. He had barely a line, but the camera didn't care. It loved him, and so did America. He wasn't supposed to be a movie star, but Hollywood in 1944 was a machine that could turn a face into a fantasy, and Guy Madison had a face the camera couldn't refuse. After his brief, nearly wordless appearance in Since You Went Away, something unexpected happened. Despite having only a few seconds of screen time, audiences were captivated. There was a sincerity in his expression, a kind of quiet strength that made people lean in, wondering who this man was. Studio moguls noticed, and just like that, his life changed. David O. Selznick, one of the most powerful producers in Hollywood, signed him to a contract. Overnight, Robert Ozell Mosley disappeared, and Guy Madison was born. Hollywood didn't waste time. They groomed him, styled him, trained him. They taught him how to walk like a leading man, smile like a matinee idol, and speak in tones that sounded just vulnerable enough to make hearts flutter, but never question his masculinity. He was marketed as clean-cut, noble, the kind of man mothers wanted their daughters to marry. America didn't just fall in love with Guy Madison, they trusted him. In films like Till the End of Time, 1946, which explored the emotional aftermath of World War II, Madison was cast as the honorable young veteran, a role that mirrored his real-life Navy service. It wasn't just typecasting, it was branding. Madison became the face of post-war decency. In Honeymoon, 1947, he played the romantic lead with that same restrained intensity. Soft eyes, steady hands, never too bold. Critics were mixed. Some called him wooden, others said he lacked range. But none of that mattered, because the audience believed him. There was something about Guy Madison that felt unshakably sincere. He wasn't trying to dazzle. He wasn't overly polished. And in that simplicity, that honest boy-next-door charm, he found his power. He didn't need to seduce the audience. He just needed to show up. And then came the role that would immortalize him. From 1951 to 1958, Guy Madison starred as frontier lawman Wild Bill Hickok in the syndicated series The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok. The show was revolutionary for its time, one of the first to air simultaneously on radio and television, reaching millions of households across America. Week after week, Madison appeared in full cowboy gear, riding tall beside his comedic sidekick Jingles, dishing out justice in the Old West. He wasn't just a character on a screen. He became a Saturday morning ritual. Children idolized him. Boys bought toy six-shooters and practiced their quick draw in the mirror, pretending to be Wild Bill. Parents saw in him a safe, reliable role model, someone who didn't just fight the bad guys, but represented what was right in a rapidly changing America. Sponsors lined up, merchandising exploded, his face was everywhere, on lunchboxes, comic books, even coloring books. Madison wasn't just acting, he was a brand. And yet, even at the height of his fame, when his image was most visible, the real Guy Madison was becoming more and more invisible. Because as America cheered for the hero on horseback, they had no idea what he was hiding just out of frame. Off camera, behind the sound stages and under the careful watch of the studio publicists, Guy Madison was living with a secret he could never afford to let slip. One that had no place in the world of 1950s Hollywood. One that, if exposed, would not only destroy his career, but brand him as something far more dangerous than a failed actor. It would brand him as un-American. In 1949, when his name was shining in lights and his face filled movie screens across the country, Guy Madison did what many leading men in Hollywood were expected to do. He got married. The bride was Gail Russell, a luminous young actress known for her haunting beauty and her emotionally vulnerable performances in films like The Uninvited and Angel and the Badman. To the public, they were the perfect couple. Rising stars, impossibly photogenic, wrapped in Hollywood's golden glow. But behind the glamour, the truth was far more fragile. Gail Russell suffered deeply from anxiety, a kind that gnawed at her constantly, even under studio makeup and designer gowns. Fame didn't lift her. It crushed her. Alcohol became her escape, and soon, her prison. Madison at first was patient, supportive, gentle even. But fame waits for no one. As his own career accelerated, with the success of Wild Bill Hickok and the press demanding his presence, the emotional distance between them widened into something unspoken and finally unsalvageable. By 1953, they separated. A year later, their divorce was finalized. There were no headlines filled with scandal, no public blame, just two people who couldn't find a way out of the maze they were both trapped in. Yet even after their split, Madison never spoke ill of her. He remained respectful, quiet, kind. It was as if he knew that Gail's pain wasn't a flaw, but a wound no one had ever bothered to heal. And then, just weeks after the divorce, he remarried. In October 1954, Guy Madison wed actress Sheila Connolly in a quick civil ceremony in Juarez, Mexico. A popular escape for Hollywood stars seeking fast divorces or fast new beginnings. On the surface, this new marriage had everything his last one didn't: stability, warmth, a shared love of nature, and eventually, family. They had 3 daughters, Bridget, Erin, and Dolly. Madison, who had grown up in a large, working-class family, took pride in fatherhood. He tried to be present, even when studios called him away. On weekends between shoots, he'd come home, saddle up horses, and play the role of dad with the same quiet dedication he brought to his westerns. But real life, unlike film sets, rarely stays on script. Madison's career was shifting. More work was coming from Europe now, especially Italy, where spaghetti westerns and war films still welcomed him. Long shooting schedules abroad meant longer stretches away from home, and the distance began to wear on the marriage. Not with scandal, not with betrayal, but with silence. Slow, steady, growing silence. By November 1960, the couple had separated. Their divorce was finalized in April 1963, yet just like before, Madison remained gracious. He stayed close with Connolly. He stayed involved in his daughters' lives. There was no public bitterness, no courtroom drama, just another chapter quietly closing. Later, as his career took him more permanently overseas, Madison entered into a long-term relationship with a woman known in biographies simply as Scola, a striking actress of Italian and Irish descent. Unlike his previous marriages, this one was never formalized, but by all accounts, it was real, deep, layered. Their bond had the weight of lived experience and the shadows of personal battles. Scola, like Gail Russell before her, struggled with depression and alcoholism, but this time, Madison was no longer the rising star desperate to hold on to a public image. He was older, quieter, more accepting of the messiness that came with love. Friends who knew them described the relationship as intense, but anchored in something tender, even when it hurt. When Scola died under mysterious circumstances in 1972, she left everything, including her actor's pension, to Madison. It was a gesture that said more than words ever could, and through all these years, all these stories that made it to the public record, there was still another truth Guy Madison kept hidden, a truth that didn't appear in the wedding photos, but would later surface in his private writings, because not every love in his life wore a dress. But what the world didn't know, what the studios never let slip, was that behind the polished smile and fan mail, Madison's heart belonged to someone else, or rather, to many others, men, fellow stars, navigating the same silent maze. It took decades for the truth to surface. Long after the movie sets had been torn down, long after the applause had faded, and long after Guy Madison had quietly stepped out of the spotlight, pieces of a hidden past began to emerge. Private letters, handwritten notes, interviews never published. In fragments, a fuller portrait began to take shape, not of a movie star, but of a man who had loved deeply and in silence. For the first time, we began to learn their names, not because someone exposed him, but because Madison, in his final years, began to speak for himself, not loudly, but with the quiet dignity that had always defined him. What he left behind wasn't scandal, it was testimony. A record of human connection in a time when even the smallest whisper of same-sex love could end everything. One of the first names he mentions is Ramon Navarro, a silent film idol, best remembered for his 1925 performance in Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ. Navarro had lived his own life caught between adoration and isolation. To the public, he was a symbol of elegance. To Hollywood insiders, he was a man known for his discretion, and to Madison, he was something more. Ramon was gentle, Madison once wrote, spiritual, and wiser than anyone gave him credit for. They would meet quietly in West Hollywood. Sometimes they'd escape to Palm Springs, under the pretense of relaxation. What we found there wasn't luxury, he wrote. It was peace, the kind of peace neither of us could ever claim in our public lives. Then came Tyrone Power, a matinee idol with the face of a dream and the burden of a double wife. For years, rumors swirled about his bisexuality. He was married, he had children, and yet the whispers never stopped. Madison didn't confirm them with tabloid drama. Instead, he offered a glimpse of something human and heartbreaking. Tyrone was charismatic but conflicted. He was carrying the weight of two worlds, the studio's expectations and his own private truth. Their connection, Madison said, happened in the quietest corners of fame, after the cameras stopped rolling, when the masks came off. He described their moments together not in the language of scandal, but of stolen serenity. Late-night drives through the canyons, shared silences in the dark. Moments when they were no longer actors, just two men asking if love could exist between them, even for a second. Then there was Anthony Perkins, the brilliant, haunted star of Psycho. Perkins' sexuality was widely speculated upon in the industry, but never acknowledged during his lifetime, and for good reason. The stakes were enormous. Madison recalled their time together as fleeting, intense, and full of hesitation. Tony was young, he wrote, haunted, always a little unsure of how much he could reveal, even to someone who understood the stakes. They shared a few passionate months, tangled in excitement and anxiety. Madison remembered how Perkins was constantly looking over his shoulder, and for good reason, he wrote. One wrong glance, one loose word, and it was over, for both of us. But perhaps the most poignant memory was Rock Hudson, the man with the million-dollar smile, a poster boy of 1950s heterosexual masculinity, the Hollywood legend, whose AIDS-related death in 1985 finally shattered the wall of silence that had kept generations of actors invisible. Rock and Madison shared something rare, a connection built on mutual understanding, shared fear, and deep, quiet affection. Madison didn't exaggerate it. He didn't claim a lifelong affair. What he described was something far more powerful. Two men, both playing a part in public, trying to find fragments of joy in private. Rock had the smile of a golden boy, Madison wrote, and the soul of a man who had to break himself into pieces just to survive. Their time together was brief, just weekends in Big Bear or quiet dinners in his canyon hideaway. But even stolen moments, he said, can be timeless. Throughout his writing, Madison was careful. He never sensationalized. He never betrayed. His tone was tender, reflective, grateful. This isn't a tell-all, he wrote. It's a testimony. These weren't affairs to boast about. They were lifelines, bonds forged in the shadows in a time when being seen could mean being destroyed. We didn't date, he wrote, not the way people think of dating now. It was furtive, coded, cautious, but it was real. There were love letters, sometimes passed under the table. There were glances across sound stages, lingering just a second too long. There were quiet mornings when the world was still sleeping, and they could, for just a moment, pretend. He said, we laughed, we held each other. We watched the sunrise and talked about the lives we wished we could have lived, out in the open. But they never could, because the cost was too high. After decades of fame, studio pressure, and hidden truths, Guy Madison chose something radically different for his final act, peace. He settled in the quiet, sun-bleached hills of Morongo Valley in Southern California's high desert. It wasn't Hollywood, and that was the point. Far from the red carpets and gossip columns, he built a ranch-style home, simple, expansive, grounded. Here, surrounded by horses, dusty trails, and the occasional desert breeze, the cowboy finally dismounted. Neighbors described him as soft-spoken, polite, and deeply private. He spent his days tending to his garden, riding on horseback, and reflecting on a life that had once been lived for everyone else, but was now, finally, his own. But time, like the desert wind, doesn't stand still. In his later years, Madison was diagnosed with emphysema, a slow, unforgiving condition that gradually stole his breath. The man once known for his commanding physical presence, the hero who rode into danger without flinching, now found himself battling for air. Even so, he never lost his grace. He continued welcoming old friends, answering letters from longtime fans, and and speaking warmly of his work, especially Wild Bill Hickok, the role that made him a household name. He didn't leave the world bitter. He left it quieter, softer, but never broken. On February 6, 1996, Guy Madison passed away at the age of 74. He died at the Desert Hospital Hospice in Palm Springs, surrounded by care, dignity, and distance from the fame that once defined him. His funeral wasn't a media circus. It was intimate, honest, a final chapter written without noise. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Cathedral City, the resting place of many legends. But unlike most of them, Guy Madison never had the luxury of telling the world who he truly was. That's why this story matters, because behind every poster boy cowboy of the 1950s might have been a man hiding a heartbreak he could never name. Because some of Hollywood's greatest icons weren't just playing roles on screen, they were acting every day of their lives just to survive. And because even now, there are people watching this, maybe older, maybe younger, who know exactly what it feels like to love in silence. Guy Madison's legacy isn't just about Westerns. It's about resilience. It's about quiet courage. And most of all, it's about the right to be remembered, not for who the world wanted you to be, but for who you really were. Guy Madison didn't get to live his love out loud. But today, we say his name, we remember his truth, and we make sure his story and the stories of so many men like him are never erased again. Because this wasn't just about one actor. This was about a generation, a system, a silence that stretched across decades, swallowing voices, loves, and lives whole. Hollywood gave us icons, but it also demanded their silence. It gave us heroes and broke them behind the scenes. Madison's story is what happens when a man does everything right by the world. Smiles for the cameras, plays the hero, marries at the right time, raises his kids, and still has to hide the deepest parts of himself just to survive. And yet, he didn't let bitterness define him. He chose dignity. He loved, even when he couldn't say it. He remembered, even when history tried to forget. That's why we tell these stories, not for shock, not for scandal, but because visibility matters, especially for those who never got to see themselves on screen, or in history books, or in the arms of someone they loved, without fear. So if you've made it this far, thank you. You didn't just watch a video, you bore witness to a man who made millions smile and carried a secret that would have cost him everything if he dared to speak it. And now that you know his truth, you help carry it forward. Guy Madison didn't get to live his love out loud, but today we said his name. We honored his truth, and by doing so, we remembered all those who were forced to hide what made them human. Because this story isn't just about one man. It's about a time, a silence, a cost, and the quiet strength it took to love in secret when the world refused to see you. If this story stayed with you, let it echo. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to stay with us, because we're just getting started. And next time, we'll be stepping into the hidden life of another legend, one whose truth might change how you see everything.